My cat's here. She loves you. Hey, today I wanted to talk to you about they, them pronouns. I don't know if you've heard of them, but they're kind of making the rounds right now. In the late 9th century, Alfred the Great said, I'm going to read this in a Simlish accent. Give ox a ofnight where o the beef, thiet he dead seen, see he mid stanum offwarbo. So that roughly translates to, if an ox gores a man or a woman so that they be dead, may he, the ox, be killed with stones. And this is my wine subscription just got rejected. So Anne Curzan gives this as one of the first possible extant examples of singular they. In March 2023, Alfred's successor, Fred, the non-binary bison, went, calling me a she or a he doesn't feel right to me. So how did we go from the good old days of he oxes goring he men and she women to death to tofu eating, guardian reading, they them bisons? How did the same humankind that produced the Doom book create a Daily Mail headline so woke that it would have sent Alfred the Great into a coma? Netflix quietly dumps kids' show Ridley Jones about a bison who comes out as non-binary to its grandma, played by Cyndi Lauper, as a lesbian creator said it got no promotion. They. It was Merriam-Webster's Word of the Year 2019. And it's around this time, around COVID time and post-COVID time, they, them pronouns just had this viral explosion. Sam Smith came out as non-binary in 2019. Piers Morgan, during his COVID rampage, interviewed just one or two people about non-binary pronouns. Yak owner Jeffree Star had some interviews with some broadcasters, claiming that they, them pronouns had been made up during the pandemic because people had nothing to do. Yeah, it was a really crazy time. So yeah, amongst all this noise, why don't we calm down, take it down a peg or two or three, and just talk about facts for a second. Let's just actually find out, if we don't already know, what pronouns are. Part 1. I just got here. What are pronouns? So we'll just start by just going over what is a pronoun, because there's people going around flailing their arms about saying pronouns don't exist. What is pronoun? A pronoun is a short word substituted for a noun or a noun phrase in order to avoid repetition in discourse. The pronouns we're talking about are personal pronouns, which just means pronouns we use to refer to people. So in English, we mark pronouns for person. So if I'm talking about myself and us, that's first person. If I'm talking about you, that's second person. If I'm talking about him and her, them over there, that's third person. In English, we also mark pronouns for number. So we separate pronouns into singular and plural. So one person or multiple people, except for you, the pronoun, the second person pronoun you, which is unspecified, meaning you don't know just from the pronoun alone if it's referencing one person or multiple people. And these features are also marked on the verb conjugation. So if we use be as an example, the verb be, in the first person singular we say am, in the third person singular we say is, while we, you and they all have the same conjugation. We are, you are, they are. I assume it's because they're all theoretically plural pronouns. We also have another feature which is only marked on third person, and that is gender. So he refers to men and oxes, and she refers to females and ships and countries and the cat's mother. in this table, they is labelled as a plural pronoun, okay? And it has the same conjugation as the other plural, so-called plural pronouns, we and you. But I'd like to cycle back. I'd like to slither back to you. This table shows how many words there were for you in Old English. And if you can't see, there's 14. And that's because in Old English, we didn't just mark pronouns for person, number, and gender. We also had a whole flippin' flying case system based on the grammatical role of a word in a sentence. So if it's subject, object, if it's possessive, things like that. And actually, we still kind of have a residual case system. Irrelevant for today. At this time, you is also split into not just singular and plural. We also have a dual number, which is 2, if you're talking to 2 people. Dual number still exists in some modern languages, such as Modern Standard Arabic. Shout out! I love dual number. It's very specific. I love that. So the period for Old English roughly is the year 450 to 1066. By the end of the Middle English period, which is roughly between 1066 and 1500, the case system has almost completely diminished, and we just have a distinction between singular and plural you. Oh my god, where did they all go? It's a knife when somebody says they like the old ye and not the new ye. Then you replaces ye in subject function. So you then have thou and you. Then you starts being used as a polite form of address, even though it's plural still. This is the same as French now. So you have tu and vous, and tu is meant to be used for, people who you know, your friends, your mates, your subordinates. And vous is either plural, you're talking to multiple people, or it's formal. So you use it for your teachers, your parents in the olden days, your memors, and your Charlie XCX. So that's a direct parallel. You have thou and you. So thou is singular and informal, while you is plural and formal. Because of this politeness epidemic, thou just starts being used with your housemates, your sheep, your cuddly toys. Like, you only be using it for your nearest and dearest, as they say. Thou just falls the fuck off, and it's just all about you, babe. Singular, plural, it's all you. So that's by the end of the 17th century. Anne Bodine, 1975, in her essay Androcentrism in Prescriptive Grammar, wrote that it was feudalism that caused European languages to develop 2 sets of second person pronouns. And she says that under the later pressures of social structural changes and the beginnings of egalitarian ideology, English second person pronouns contracted into a single word, you. So isn't that interesting? We have a plural pronoun initially used to refer to multiple people. Then, because of curious social change, grammatically the pronoun changes. No longer is it just plural, it's unspecified. It can be used as a singular or plural pronoun. Curiouser and curiouser. Part 2. Mental illness is contagious. How can plural become singular? Okay, so obviously I did just tease the plural to singular pipeline, one that's already very well established. So I'm going to start the second part by looking at the earliest origins of singular they that we know about. So I'd like to take us back to Alfred the Great's Doom book. Bring back Doom books, am I right, girls? Doom, by the way, it means judgment. So it was a legal code, it was about judgments, but he really spiced it up with this ox thing. So as I mentioned earlier, this is possibly the earliest example of they being used as a singular pronoun, because it's antecedent, that means the noun or noun phrase it's referring to is singular. And how do we know that this noun phrase, a man or a woman, is singular? Well, we can actually go back to our handy little pronoun table that I made earlier. This is a good test if you're not sure if an antecedent, if you're not sure if it's plural or singular, you just stick it in the conjugation table and that should tell you your answer. So which of these sounds correct? A man or a woman is going to enter the room. A man or a woman are going to enter the room. It's obviously the first one, and is, as we can see from our table, is a singular verb conjugation, meaning that the antecedent, the noun phrase, is singular, meaning that in this case he uses they as a singular pronoun. And there's so many examples beyond the Doom book. So looking at the English literary canon, as grammarians love to do, here's another one from Shakespeare. And everyone to rest themselves betake. Everyone thinks that everyone is a plural pronoun. Everyone obviously is plural because it refers to multiple people. It refers to literally every people. Well, let's take this back to the lab. Would you say everyone is annoying or everyone are annoying? So obviously the first one is correct, and it uses is, which is the third person singular conjugation, meaning it's a singular antecedent. So this example from Shakespeare is actually from Pootsma, 1914. He gives about freaking 100 million examples from the literary canon, and he gives the examples as grammatical mistakes. And I'm just thinking, you're literally pulling examples from the most famous, works, the most iconic works in the English language, and somehow you're saying they're all mistaken. It's not really looking good for you, Pootsma. Now, I will concede that these antecedents are notionally plural. As I said, people are going to say that's a plural antecedent because it refers to multiple people. However, grammatically, they are singular. Just like with you, how it was initially grammatically singular and plural, and then they fused together, and grammatically now they are the same, and they're conjugated the same. I have a little later example from Jane Austen here from the 18th century, which is a little bit different. And just to warn everybody, there's a really controversial opinion coming up. I don't want anyone to be offended. When a person has too great a degree of red in their complexion, it gives their face, in my opinion, too red a look. That's just her opinion, guys. Can everyone just calm the down? So here we have another singular they. It's referring to a singular antecedent, a person, but there's not necessarily a notion of plurality. A person, we all know that's referring to one person. There's no mistake there. However, there is a notion of universality there, or genericity. She's talking about a person. She could be talking about anyone. And this kind of same idea goes for the earlier example from Alfred the Great. A man or a woman, you're basically saying a person. You're saying anyone. So the scope of they as a pronoun has expanded, because to go down a little semantics path, they has gone from referencing the pool of all people to one person of the pool of all people. Grammatically they're different because you're not talking about everyone now, you're talking about one person amongst everyone. And you can see then how this would lend itself to gender neutrality, because since we're talking about anyone, we're not specifying gender. So you've got Shakespeare, you've got Jane Austen, you've got Alfred the Flippin' Amazing, and loads of other people who I've not included of just read Pootsma, or don't, because it's boring as fuck. You have all these people of literary eminence, masters of the written word, using they with a grammatically singular antecedent. So why and when did people start saying that's ungrammatical? Well, in the 18th century, we see the rise of prescriptive grammars for English speakers. Although English grammar books had been written earlier than this, of course, these earlier grammars were more for showing the eminence of English, and English was compared to Latin a lot, because as with all of the most popular languages of the world and those that are used the most in official settings, you don't just get the language out of nowhere. It comes from a spoken language, and it's only through the active standardization and codification of this spoken language that you get an official language. You need to write everything down and say, this is how everyone's supposed to say it. And back in this time, they're basically trying to demonstrate the prestige of English by comparing it to Latin, the ancient language. And they were also for foreign language instruction, and I suppose for reference. Whereas in the 18th century, we see the rise of prescriptive grammars, so grammars actively designed to prescribe and proscribe ways of writing, or by extension speaking. So why does this happen? Well, you have more people being educated, more people actually writing because they're being educated. You have a growing middle class, you have mass printing, so we all need, if we're all writing, we should be spelling things the same so that people aren't getting confused. And besides the practical element of prescriptive grammars, they also allowed people to differentiate themselves socially through language, because, like I said, there's a growing middle class in England at this time, and as the emergent middle class, you want to be different from the lower classes. You want to show, I'm more educated, I know how to speak, I'm better than you, babe. Alright. And these grammar books will become the standard references for educational establishments and publishing houses everywhere in the English-speaking world. Now, in case you didn't know, the language that is codified and becomes standard reference within a society is decided on by those with the socio-political means to prescribe such standards. And these men, they ruled in their little books that they was not to be used with a singular antecedent as it had been for many centuries, but was only to be used for grammatically plural reference. So when referring to a person of unspecified gender, they could therefore not be used, and neither could he or she, as this was viewed as finical and pedantic. That's from White, 1880. Rather, if one required a pronoun which should be gender non-specific or generic, the masculine he should be used as, quote, grammatically, men are more important than women. Roberts, 1967. I'm not sure why he had to add grammatically in there. So White, the guy who is so against being finical and pedantic, Mr. White, who wrote a whole grammar book correcting people's grammar. But that's not finical or pedantic. That's his quest, right? That's his hobby. God forbid a man have hobbies. White said famous writer John Ruskin ought not to have written, but if a customer wishes you to injure their foot, you are to refuse their pleasure. He should have instead written, if a customer wishes you to injure his foot, you are to refuse his pleasure. Right. So he said, Ruskin, you are wrong for that. You are wrong for that. Just in the spirit of curiosity, in the spirit of knowledge, I thought I just wanted to also zoom in on this example quickly, because I just found it so weird. I really did not know what I was talking about. Why would a customer want you to injure their foot? And so the context of this is John Ruskin was, besides being, let's read off Wikipedia, an English polymath, writer, lecturer, art historian, art critic, draftsman. What the flip is a draftsman? Is it someone who plays drafts? Oh, a person who makes detailed technical plans or drawings. He was part of a communal living utopian experiment called the Totley Colony, which was based, a utopian colony based in Sheffield. Of course it was based in Sheffield. This is what I got from this random website. I can't remember even, I'll link it down below because it's just so random. So apparently in the text that this was extracted from, this example, he was telling shoemakers in the guild, in this colony, not to injure their customers' feet if they asked them to. Now, no more context was given. So my assumption there is that people were asking for uncomfortable shoes to be made to be fashionable. Anyway, end of tangent. R.I.P. John Ruskin, you would have loved Crocs. So we can tell that this is not gender neutral. I mean, the fact that it's being used from, as we can see from all of Pootsman's examples, as we can see from White's examples, they is being used as a gender neutral pronoun, whether they like it or not. Clearly his is not gender neutral. Like, I think the grammarians are also being influenced by French here, because in French, il is masculine. It's a masculine pronoun. It means he, but it also is a gender neutral, well, supposedly a gender neutral pronoun. Also, an impersonal pronoun, so it's used in places where in English we would say it. So for example, il pleut means it's raining, and I think this allows the gender neutral interpretation of il to continue. The fact that these people are actually having to codify and outlaw the use of they as a singular pronoun is just proof that it is being used as such. The fact that White said using he or she rather than he is pedantic, and yet he's outlawing centuries of usage is crazy. Is crazy work. So why do we think, let's have a little think, why do we think that Mr. White was not happy with us saying he or she? Why did he just want us to use he? Is it because he really believes that they cannot be the singular pronoun? Does he really believe that all of these people have got it wrong? All of these great writers have just got it wrong. Well, let's look at another random prohibition of White's. So Mr. White also claims it's ungrammatical to say that John Smith is married to Mary Jones, because properly speaking, a man is not married to a woman or married with her, nor are a man and a woman married with each other. The woman is married to the man. It is her name that is lost in his. Now, if you want to just go off and say this is just the reality of the times, that's what it was like. So why did he have to outlaw it? Why did he have to say that? The only reason he's having to outlaw this is because it's what normal people are saying and doing. It's like that friend who just keeps losing friends, and somehow it's always everyone else's fault and they're always right. So these grammarians had such an influence, as I've already said. They were setting the standards. They were writing the dictionaries. They were writing the grammar books. They were writing everything, So eventually, in 1850, we get the Act for shortening the language used in Acts of Parliament. Let me reenact this for you. Be it enacted that in all acts, words importing the masculine gender shall be deemed and taken to include females, and the singular to include the plural, and the plural the singular, unless the contrary as to gender or number is expressly provided. So basically, because they just thought, oh my god, this is so finical, this is so pedantic, they just got rid of he or she, he and she. They just started saying he. So by law, in law, he now refers to men and women. And just while I'm talking about this, I thought I would just mention Hekanaho 2022 refers to this as by the way, this dissertation is amazing and so thorough, and you should read it. Hekanaho refers to this as the male as norm, or MAN, man, principle, which is basically what we all know, which is that the world is centered around men and men are viewed as the default person. The book Invisible Women by Caroline Criado Perez is all about this. If some of you still haven't read Invisible Women, let's hurry it up a little bit. Alright, let's catch up. The introduction chapter is called The Default Male, and it's amazing introduction. Even if you just read that, you could just read that. So the Act for Shortening the Language Used in Acts of Parliament was actually overturned in 2007. So they recommend, instead of using he as a generic pronoun, to either repeat the noun, change the pronoun, so by using they, or a person, or to rewrite or avoid the need for a pronoun. Obviously, it's preceded by lots of campaigning against generic he. For example, feminists in the 1970s. So while I was making this video, I was thinking, well, actually, what is the difference between feminists campaigning against generic he and the grammarians campaigning for it? They're both taking ideological stances in an attempt to change language. But I'm here to tell you, I think there is a difference. Firstly, generic he, as I've explained, didn't reflect usage at the time, and to use generic he at that time in such a staunch manner was actually to show allegiance with sexism rather than grammar. Secondly, I think if we are going to try and change actual usage, as both grammarians and feminists wanted, I think we have to be open about the reasons behind that change and not hide behind debates of grammaticality. And that's basically what I'm arguing for in this video, because I think we waste a lot of time discussing these logicless diatribes against they, them pronouns, when it would be more productive to discuss non-binary identity and what that entails and how it fits into the material world. And I think that is the difference, that the feminists were actually saying, we don't want to speak like this because it's sexist and that's disrespectful to us. Deborah Cameron, in her article, The Pronominal is Political, says that the problem first and second wave feminists had with generic masculine pronouns was not about gender in the sense of identity, but about gender as an axis of power. The question was why he outranked and subsumed she, and it mattered because that usage mirrored the actual social fact of women's legal and political non-personhood. Exactly. Whereas the grammarians were just like, well, actually, grammatically, men are more important. Grammatically, men are more important grammatically. Anyway, coming back to my fave, the Interpretation Act. Is it not ridiculous to write every law in terms of the masculine, in terms of half of the population, and then at the end add a little appendix for the other half of the population saying, yes, this applies to the other half of the population too, unless we say otherwise? This just creates too much room for interpretation. Wendy Martina wrote an amazing essay called Beyond the He-Man Approach, The Case for Non-Sexist Language in 1980. And in this essay, she discusses examples of this room for interpretation in legal cases. One of those examples being the pretty famous case of Yvonne Swan, who was initially sentenced to 20 years in prison for shooting and killing her neighbour. He had been identified in the sexual assault of her young daughter, and when he was confronted with this accusation, he went over to the house, started walking towards Swan's other young child, and as he got closer to Yvonne, she shot him. So she was charged with second-degree murder. But in 1977, this was appealed by the Washington Supreme Court, as it was claimed the court instructions had encouraged jurors to apply a self-defense standard applicable to an altercation between two men, rather than Yvonne, a 5'4", slim woman who also had a cast on her foot at the time. Her foot was injured. And a 60-year-old, 6-foot drunken man. Obviously, Yvonne realistically could not have defended herself against him. So her charge was reduced to manslaughter. So why did the self-defense standard describe an altercation between two men? Well, because it was read in the generic he. The standard that was set was obviously not applicable to the case in hand. And her sentence was reduced to 5 years of probation and 1 year of community service. So I think the case of Yvonne Swan perfectly illustrates how generic he does not subsume, does not include women, but rather erases them and obscures the material differences between men and women. I think you could argue that the same could happen with gender-neutral language, and I think you'd probably be right, but certainly it's better to treat everyone as a person first under law, rather than treating somebody as male unless stated otherwise. The problem is, of course, with our attitudes and not with language itself, which is basically what I'm trying to say in this whole video. Treating everyone as male unless stated otherwise is also just adding like unnecessary snags, because you're literally erasing half of the population there, and obviously there's going to be problems that arise out of that. So anyway, it's sorted now, but just in case anyone tries to bring back the Interpretation Act, please don't. Me stopping the Interpretation Act, please don't. Please. I think the law scholar Marguerite Ritchie summarises this best when she says, wherever any statute or regulation is drafted in terms of the male, a woman has no guarantee that it confers her any rights at all. She was actually there talking about the Canadian Interpretation Act, which was inherited from ours in England. And as I'm sure you could guess, feminists in the 1970s, as they are today, as they always have been, were met with ridicule. And I read a couple of articles which were just, they could have been written yesterday, like they were so pertinent to the debates that we're still having now. I'll read some quotations. This is a piece from Stephen Kampfer in Time magazine, 1972. He uses the following words in mockery: herstory, classic, girl-cotting instead of boycotting, countess down, otto-it instead of ottoman, person fingers instead of lady fingers, the biscuits. He says, Congressman is an office, not a chauvinist plot. Mankind is a term for all humanity, not some 49% of it. The feminist attack on social crimes may be as legitimate as it was inevitable, but the attack on words is only another social crime, one against the means and hopes of communication. And he compares this to A Clockwork Orange, the dystopian novel by Anthony Burgess. He says, for A Clockwork Orange, Anthony Burgess created a wall-to-wall nightmare in which society dissolves into violence and repression. The condition is reflected in the breakdown of language into nadsat, a jumble of portmanteau constructions. To Burgess, language is the breath of civilization. Cut it short and society suffocates. That is an insight worth pondering. And that really reminded me of Jordan Peterson. If you don't know who he is or what he is, oh no. He campaigned in 2016 against Bill C-16, which was an amendment to the Canadian Human Rights Act to include gender identity or expression to the definition of a social group. He said, I've studied authoritarianism for a very long time, for 40 years, and they're started by people's attempts to control the ideological and linguistic territory. There's no way I'm going to use words made up by people who are doing that. Not a chance. So there you have two men, 5 decades apart, presenting gender-neutral language as an authoritarian nightmare, even though the actual picture of gender-neutral language as it is today is very different from the one Kampfer is describing. Obviously, the gender-neutral language he's fighting against in the article is now language that we don't really think about. We don't see generic he really anymore. Imagine telling Kampfer about non-binary pronouns. He would swoon to death. Personally, I think it's a lot more authoritarian to have a group of people from a very specific socioeconomic class write the rule book for the rest of the English-speaking world. People who have not been elected by anyone to do so, but they just have the socioeconomic status to enforce their arbitrary opinions on everybody else. I understand that people can get scared when language changes are proposed, but it's not authoritarian if there's a democratic president for it. If lots of people within a community agree to change the way to speak because they want to be more respectful towards each other, that's a community decision. It's not a fascist dictatorship. It also reminded me of ContraPoint's video on Anita Bryant and the gay panic in America in the 70s and 80s, and how the same arguments are now being used against trans rights, against trans people. There are also so many modern studies on generic key showing that it's not interpreted as gender neutral. For example, Bjorkman 2017 mentions several psychological studies which prove generic key has a gender bias. It's just viewed as masculine. Like, I don't think I need to say that. I don't think it's a shock to anyone that it is viewed as masculine. But even in French, as I was saying before, il is a masculine pronoun, but also it is used as a gender neutral pronoun. But studies show that that is not viewed as gender neutral. It's not interpreted psychologically as gender neutral either. When supposedly gender neutral but grammatically masculine pronouns are used in job advertisements, for example, you get less female applicants. So the whole reason I've mentioned all of this is just to say they has been used as a gender neutral pronoun for centuries. The initial reason it was pushed back as a gender neutral pronoun was because of sexism. You know the story. And there's plenty of evidence to back this up, that they is interpreted as a singular gender neutral pronoun without struggle. For example, Baranowski 2002 and Balhorn 2009 found that they was the most common generic pronoun in newspaper corpora. Furch and Gernsbacher 1997 in their reading time experiments also showed that they, when used as a singular pronoun, is read much more quickly than clauses containing a gendered pronoun that went against the gender stereotype of the antecedent, and was read just as quickly as clauses containing a gendered pronoun that matched the stereotype of the antecedent. As they say in linguistic research, there's no processing cost. It's basically part of our grammar. We're not talking here about non-binary they, by the way, because there is a processing cost there right now. And that's what I'm going to talk about in the next part. So, without further ado, Part 3. Non-binary people of all gender appropriations and the pronouns. Are people really this confused? Gender neutral or Epicene they is well established, widespread, and unremarkable. So why has it become remarkable again? Why is everyone questioning its grammaticality again? So, as I said at the very beginning, socially pronouns have become buzzwords to such a point that people have started saying, I don't have them. Also, I've noticed people suddenly losing the ability to conjugate the third person if they're referring to a non-binary person. There's a really good example of this in one of Piers Morgan's GMB videos. Piers in this video is interviewing a parent bringing up their child as gender neutral, and he says, talking about the baby sister, Hazel says, can I play a game with you? And the parent corrects him. She probably just says, Sparrow, can I play a game with you? And then he says, but if I'm in the room and I want to have a cookie and I ask Hazel, can I have a cookie? And she says, yes, I'll just ask they. And then Susanna Reid and the parent corrects him. So Hazel might say, I'll ask them if they want to share. He just has this aneurysm and forgets how to address a person. I think the moral panic that arose in the 1970s and 80s about abandoning generic key is basically repeating itself. We have the exact same arguments now about totalitarianism, the same feigning of ignorance and, mockery. Like, nobody was ever speaking about changing manhole to personhole. And so for this final part, I wanted to explore whether there is some genuine confusion. Because, there's people I know in real life who are well-intentioned, good people, I believe, and they struggle with non-binary pronouns. It's a metaphysical issue. It's a cognitive issue. There's some threshold in my brain, and I believe in other people's brains, that is yet to be overcome when it comes to non-binary identity as a whole. It is a new concept for a lot of people. So there's actually conflicting evidence on non-binary pronouns as to how they're being interpreted, whether they're being interpreted as grammatical, whether they're being interpreted as acceptable. There's quite a few grammaticality judgment studies now on non-binary pronouns. And grammaticality judgment studies, for those who aren't familiar with them, just do what they say on the tin. They test the grammaticality of a given linguistic construction. There's gap fill exercises, there's surveys, so they will literally give you a sentence and ask if it's acceptable or not. There's eye tracking studies, so like the reading time study I mentioned earlier from Futch and Gernsbacher, EEG experiments, which record brain activity, so certain grammatical anomalies will show up as such. So you can actually see through electrical impulses when your brain is struggling to understand a sentence. So as I said, the evidence is quite conflicting. I was surprised to find a lot of studies found non-binary pronouns were very much accepted, and sometimes even more than generic they, so epicene they, gender neutral they. I found that really strange, and I think it's probably due to the fact that a lot of these studies tended to include a high percentage of LGBTQ plus participants or allies and or university students. These groups are obviously not representative of the general population. These are the groups campaigning for LGBTQ plus rights, and I think it's kind of misleading to use those groups as your primary subjects. But there are also plenty of studies showing the opposite, that people are not finding non-binary pronouns acceptable, particularly when they're used with a proper name as an antecedent. They show what you would expect, like younger speakers find non-binary they more acceptable. Obviously we can't tell right now if that's indicating a generational change, if non-binary they is becoming more acceptable in the general population, whether it's becoming part of people's grammars. If you're looking at a group of people and the young people have different speaking habits to the older people, you might say, oh, there's a change happening because the younger people are speaking this way and the older people are speaking this way. But there's also linguistic habits that are what we call age graded. So, for example, young people tend to swear a lot more than older people, and you could look at data which shows that young people swear more than older people, and say, oh, people are swearing more nowadays, which could be true, but actually evidence shows that that's an age graded change, that you do just become more conservative and swear less when you're older, in general, So yeah, it's not really clear if non-binary pronouns are being accepted more, or if it's just, that's the way younger people are and they are just more accepting and open to inclusive language. But Bjorkman 2017 found that even younger speakers were reluctant to use non-binary they in sentences where its antecedent was a proper name or a gender-specific noun. Furthermore, so as I said before, when the brain encounters grammatical anomalies, it elicits a certain electrical impulse. And Leventhal et al. 2020 found that when they referred to a proper name as an antecedent, this elicited a P600, which is a type of impulse associated with syntactic anomalies. So it's looking like it's the proper name as an antecedent, which is the issue. Obviously we're conditioned from our first days on this earth that there's male and female gender, and that you refer to a person as he or she. Non-binary is not really a category embedded in our brains yet, and we're only really using the gender neutral pronoun because either we don't know the person's gender, or it's irrelevant, or we're obscuring it for some reason, for example, to keep them anonymous. Aside from the ontological question of gender, I think it is that semantic association with anonymity that people are struggling with, and that's reflected in Camillier et al. 2019, who found that people rated they as more natural for reference that were engendered or ambiguous, for example, the dentist, and for reference that was socially distant, for example, the dentist, than those references which were socially close, so my friend. If you are talking about a specific person, you're not talking about a generic person, you're not talking about an anonymous person. So that's why I think it sounds strange when you're referring to a specific person to be using a gender neutral pronoun, because the gender neutral pronoun they, the singular they that we're familiar with, is used for generic reference, is used for universal reference, as we were discussing earlier. I think a really illustrative example of the strength of this socially distant feature of singular they is in dating shows. It's so hard to find examples of this, because obviously they is such a common word, and if you type what are you going to type in Google, like. So I've been collecting examples as and when. Tyler in Love Island season 3, she's doing a recoupling speech, and she says, I would like to couple up with this boy because, and then describes all these things about him. It's the absolute menace. What's his name? Johnny. He's actually become like this, like, oh, I actually can't even speak about Johnny. He's become this like Dubai fucking finance influencer. It's, oh my god, it's actually crazy. That was a whole rabbit hole. I think that was a whole evening of rabbit hole with Tyler and Johnny. But anyway, she's referring to Johnny the whole time. And at the end of her speech, she says, I'd love to know a lot more about them. Who's them? Why are you using them when you're talking about a specific person who we all know you're talking about, and we all know is a man? And it's because recoupling speeches are supposed to be anonymous, and it's this sentiment of anonymity which actually pervades her pronoun usage, because we all know who she's talking about, and even if we didn't know which boy she was talking about, we would know that she was talking about a boy. And I thought that was a really good example of the strength, because even in this aggressively heterosexual paradigm, you still have people using singular they about a man. So we know this isn't, LGBTQ plus adjacent. She's not trying to be woke. Another example that I found on a dating show, I was watching Married at First Sight. Tim from MAFSA said he wanted a woman who was comfortable in their own skin. In their own skin. We're talking about a woman here. He's talking about the woman that he wants to marry on Married at First Sight. A natural looking woman who's confident in their own body. That's in season 12, episode 2. I mean, again, aggressively heterosexual. Clearly there's no like woke agenda in Tim. I mean, his only agenda is to lie, because his first reaction to Katie was that he didn't like how she looked. So yeah, I think in conclusion, there is definitely, like I said, a cognitive threshold to be overcome, and I think it is the notion of anonymity and social distance that is making us feel weird, making people feel weird about using non-binary pronouns. And that's really what I came to say. I just wanted to say singular they is not ungrammatical, and just because there is a barrier there doesn't mean that there will be forever. But I just think while the bigots and everything are there, we also need to treat people with good faith and actually try and understand why well-intentioned people are finding this difficult, why people who are supportive of LGBTQ plus causes are struggling to use non-binary pronouns. For example, Hernandez 2020 found that some participants stated that although they support trans people and oppose prescriptive grammar, using singular they is extremely difficult for them, partially because of how infrequently they encounter individuals who use they them pronouns. So it's also a matter of like just not being used to it, you know. So yeah, I mean, only time will tell as to whether non-binary pronouns become part of our grammar. And on the other side of that, I think it's also important for us to remember the cyclical nature of these bigoted arguments against people who just want human rights, and to always be and always have that in the forefront of our minds when we're talking about, you know, these issues. Because as I said at the beginning, linguistic issues often veil other ideological issues. So I think I'm going to send you all my good vibes, and I'll leave you with this quote, which I think just summarises everything that I've said. It's cited in Breccia 2021 as a quote from Nosco 2016, but I've tried to find the original and I can't find anything. So I don't know where this quote is really from, but it's legendary. Okay, I'm just going to read it. In the end, language does not respond well to the demands of lawmakers, grammarians, or social activists. Instead, its direction is charted by ordinary speakers who choose words not from some moral imperative, but just because they find them useful or effective, or sometimes for no discernible reason at all. Thanks for listening. I hope you learned something. And I hope you agree with everything I said. Otherwise I'm going to cry. Just kidding. Night night.